All right, thanks for listening to this week's episode. We had Leah on the podcast who handles our leasing and our inspections, and it was an interesting conversation because not a lot of people talk about how, what the standard is for having a property that's ready to rent and how it affects the whole cycle and the whole experience you have with your tenant. And I'm here to tell you this stuff matters. If you ignore rent-ready standards, you're going to have a tougher time as a landlord versus if you pay attention to them and you present a nice product. Think of if you go to a hotel and the hotel's clean and the bed's made and everything's where it's supposed to be and the toiletries are stocked, it sends a message versus if you go to a hotel and it looks like the people that were there before you just walked out and the housekeeper never came. That would probably gross you out. You probably would turn around and walk out and say, I'm not staying in this hotel. Principle's kind of the same. People want to have the same feelings when they're moving into their house for the first time that they're renting or when they're going to look at it for the first time. If it looks like in bad shape, they're probably not going to rent it. Even though if you spend some time and get it all cleaned up and make sure it's nice, they might rent it. So something to keep in mind, some good tips for sure. Thanks for being our listeners. If you have any topics that you want to see on the podcast, reach out to us. It's podcast@rinconmanagement.com. If you know somebody this would be helpful for, please share it. Please leave a review. All those good things really help us out. And thanks for your time. All right. Today we have Leah McPhail on the show. Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Leah works for Rincon Property Management. She is in charge of a couple things, one being leasing our properties and then the other being inspecting our properties. So she has a unique perspective in the fact that she knows what tenants want because she's dealing with them on the leasing side. So one of her roles is to get our properties rented out. So she gets a ton of feedback from prospective tenants. And then she knows what their issues are, what they like, what they don't like, and then that usually pertains to, her job as being responsible for inspections because she hears it from tenants. If the properties aren't up to the standards that we want them to be, you're hearing from it. So, just a little context for our listeners. Today, I want to talk about those rent-ready standards and why they're important, how they, affect the whole process in general. So why don't you kind of just start one by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, kind of introducing yourself, and then we can kind of jump into the meat of it.
Yeah. Like you said, I'm Leah. I am not a California native. I moved here from Charlotte, North Carolina about 1.5 years ago. So this California real estate scene especially has been totally different than what I'm used to, but my husband is in the military, so we will not be here for long, unfortunately. I do love it here, but we will be moving somewhere else probably in about 1 year. So trying to enjoy all of the hikes, the beach, the mountains while we can. I've been working at Rincon for 1.5 years since I moved, and working in real estate has really showed me the importance and the love that I have for investing in real estate, learning about real estate. I got my real estate license and have since, with some, not coercion, but maybe some persuasion from Peter, my husband and I bought a house or a townhome. So, really super, super glad to have gotten a chance to work here, experience everything about learning about real estate and then having the perspective of what tenants want, like Peter was saying, what they complain about, what they look for, going into owning a home and then renting it out after we leave. So that is a little bit about myself, about my work experience here at Rincon. And yeah, I definitely hear stuff from tenants, as he said. So I get all of the complaints and
almost sounded like a job interview question there for a second. But so what I will say is, yeah, we've gone down this path for a while. I'm trying to get you guys to see the value of real estate investing, especially in the military, because there's a strategy. There's military people who buy a house every time they end up at a new duty station, assuming it's in the United States, in the States. And hopefully you guys go down that path. I know you've researched it, looked into it. Is that what's your take on that? Because obviously you're living that firsthand, and you bought your first house, and this was in essence was this your guys' first assignment or your first duty station, or?
It was, yes. First duty station and first home. So a lot of firsts here, but we definitely are open and are hoping, given everything lines up, wherever we move next. There's always a lot of factors in the military, but we would love to buy a house wherever we go and continue to rent it out as we move, because there are tons of success stories, and it's worked really well for a lot of military people. So definitely would love that.
Yeah, and we've had a few of them on the podcast, but it's a great strategy, and it's kind of like forced upon you. Like, no matter where you go, you have to have somewhere to live, and you're either going to rent or you're going to buy. So it seems like a no-brainer if you can swing it to buy. But the reason I think it gives you an interesting perspective is because you represent our clients, as, in your role for our company, where essentially, we're working to get properties rented for our clients who are landlords, the people that own the properties. And you have an interesting perspective because you now also own a property, and then you are going to be renting this property in the next year or so, depending on when you guys get sent away. So do you think that changes your perspective? If you didn't own a house and you didn't understand all of that, like how has that changed after you've bought a house and knowing that you're going to be a landlord here pretty soon?
I definitely can see an owner's perspective for a lot of things. And I think if I am ever a tenant again, I will be more understanding of repairs when they come up. I will do as much as I can to fix them myself or to make adjustments to them before I immediately report them, because I can see that side as now an owner and soon to be landlord of a property.
Yeah. There are people that hire property management companies that won't hire them if they don't also own investment property themselves, for that very reason, because if you didn't, if no one at the management company owned rental property, it's kind of hard to sometimes understand, where the owner's coming from. So there's a lot of people that's one of their, in the bigger pockets, like communities, like make sure your property management company owns real estate as well, because they'll understand you more. I think it applies. I don't know that it's like an absolute hard and fast rule, like if they don't, that they're not able to, but nonetheless, I think it adds perspective. And let's get into the meat of what we're talking about, which is rent-ready standards. And this is a big deal at our company. In fact, this was one of your quarterly objectives that you just worked on. For people that don't know what that is, it's an EOS term. Basically, we identify like important projects or things that we get done in our business, and emphasizing these rent-ready standards is important, which is why it was something that you worked on. So I know you're proud of the work you did. I think you did a great job, but let's get into what are rent-ready standards? Why does this matter? Like, what's the deal with them?
Yeah, so essentially a rent-ready standard is how we as a property management company and how you as the owner of the home should leave your home or give your home to the management company to be advertised. This kind of term in our vocabulary here at Rincon stemmed from a big problem that I, as the inspection coordinator, found a lot was I would get sent out to take advertising photos and the home wasn't ready. So I would drive out, have all my equipment, and then there would be smoke detectors that needed to be installed, or the home was dirty. Tons of different things that I've seen, but it happened over and over, and I thought there's got to be a way to help ease this sort of this confusion between, is the home ready or is it not? When do we start advertising? When do we put it on pre-advertising? And so we made a list of around 6 things that we want owners to look for as they are preparing to hand the property over to us. And then that we'll check for as we begin advertising to make sure that it is ready to go.
Yeah, and I'll just add some context to this for our listeners. So there are occasions when we are in charge of getting a property rent ready, we meaning the property management company. And I think what you're alluding to is when we aren't in charge of getting the property ready. So like, if our client's like, I'm going to get the property ready on my own, I know exactly what to do. And then when they give it to us, it's not ready, which then causes a problem with how fast we can get it rented, or the feedback that we're getting from people who are looking at it, because you want to put your best foot forward, make the best impression the first time with the prospective tenant, not them go in the property, see that it's dirty, see that a window's broken or paint's all messed up, and then try to convince them that we're going to fix all that stuff and please rent this property anyway. That's obviously not what we want. So that's kind of where this push at our company anyway came from, was trying to align everybody on like, no, this is our standard for a property that's ready to rent. This is why it's important. But it goes deeper than that. It goes to, in my mind, it goes to, this is how we want to give every property to a new tenant. Talk to that a little bit if you can, and not necessarily who's at fault for why the property is the way it is, but why is it important that we have a standard and we give our properties to tenants in a certain condition?
Yeah, I will answer that in just a second. Just to hit on something that you mentioned, was the importance. Even just yesterday, we had a showing. It's a property that's been on the market for 3 or 4 weeks. So it's had plenty of people walking through, lots of mud that's being trucked through the floors because it's just had a lot of showings. And I was on the phone with him, and he said how much he loved the property, but he noted how dirty it was. And he even said, this tees up perfectly for our podcast, but he says, it gives such a bad impression when I love the home, but it's dirty. It just isn't a great first impression. And I thought it was funny that I got that, comment just a day before we were going to go on the podcast, because it is truly so important in the advertising to get your home rented. But also, as you asked, Peter, it's important to give a new tenant a clean home, a home that's ready to go for a lot of reasons. One of the most important, I would say, is the safety of the tenants. Making sure smoke detectors, doors lock, windows lock. For me, that is the thing that drives me, is the safety. As I've been a homeowner and a renter, and now living at home alone while my husband is deployed, safety has always been a really big part of having a home. And so to me, that's the first, is just making sure that they receive and feel safe in their home. That obviously would have repercussions on the owner with insurance, or if there's physical damage, that's a whole different subject. But in terms of just receiving a clean and well-maintained home, I think it just goes to what we value as a company. Property management gets a bad reputation, but we do care for our tenants and our owners. We want everyone to be happy in the equation. And as a person, shelter is one of our 4 basic needs in life.
Sure.
And when a tenant doesn't feel like their home is, livable, or stuff isn't functioning, that puts a very bad taste in their mouth, even in their tenancy, apart from advertising. And so making sure that the home is ready to go will not only get your home rented faster, but there will likely be less problems throughout the tenancy. The tenants will be happier, there won't be as many issues, and then ideally they would stay for longer if there aren't those issues. So that was
no, it's all good. It's all good. I want to chime in on a couple things. One, there are habitability laws in California in the code, in the civil code that we have, which I'll go over here in a second, but I'll back up a little bit and say that I always have a conversation, or I used to always have conversations with our potential new clients, our new owner clients, that your house sends a message. Whether you want it to or not, if somebody walks through it and they're looking to rent it, it is 100% sending a message. And we want the message to be, we like our house, we take good care of our house, we pay attention to the details, we fix things when they break, and we expect you to do the same thing. That's the messaging that we want. The opposite being, if you walk through the house and there's holes in the drywall, it hasn't been painted in 20 years, the carpet's orange, that also sends a message. And the message that sends is, we don't really care about this house, and we don't really care what you do to this house. Just move in and pay the rent, and that's all that matters. That's the wrong message, right? That's not the message we want to send, because, and I've seen this time and time again, if a house is like that, which, disclaimer, we won't manage a property that looks like that, but we've taken over properties that have been like that, and then we've updated them. But when you manage a house like that, the tenants, most of the time, will follow suit, and they'll go, you don't care about this house? I don't care about this house either. And they'll leave it in worse condition, and or not pay the rent, or cause problems with the neighbors. Like, it attracts a bad house like that attracts the wrong tenant, a bad tenant, which is the opposite of what most good landlords want. We want good tenants who take great care of the property and, are, I don't want to say productive members of society, but just who take care of the property and help you maintain the value of the investment and all those things. So that's why this stuff matters, is because we want the messaging to be right, and we want your property, our client's property, to be in the same, if not better condition after the tenants move out, not the opposite, which we've all heard the horror stories of people who destroy the properties. And in fact, this is a good question for you, and I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Since you've been here, which has been roughly a year and a half, how many properties that we manage have you seen completely destroyed and just in such bad shape that it was going to take, $50,000 to get them back to where they needed to be, where the tenant had like maliciously destroyed the property? How many times have you seen that?
I have not seen that since I've been here for a year and a half.
Yeah,
I have seen dirty. I have seen unbelievably, disgustingly dirty. I would think $50,000 worth to just clean it, but probably not that much.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is because when you do have rent-ready standards and you do take care of the tenant, the properties and the tenants, and you repair things, we don't have those problems. It's not that they can't happen, because they absolutely can. I don't want to say we're like guaranteeing that your property is never going to have a problem. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying is, when you follow rent-ready standards, when you respond to your tenants, when you're a good landlord, it's usually reciprocated by the tenant. And then the other thing, I'll address what you said about properties being dirty. There's a difference between like destroying a property and being dirty, right? Like,
yes.
Not everybody lives the same. Like, what I would consider clean and what somebody else considers clean could be two totally different things. And that's where security deposits come in, right? So if we have a difference of opinion on how clean a property is, that's where we take the security deposit and then have it professionally cleaned. And you've seen a couple of the rehab projects that we've taken on where we didn't manage the property. We were hired to come in and fix a bunch of stuff, and it's amazing what a remodel, a rehab, a good cleaning can do to like make a drastic difference in the condition of a property. Yeah, all right, let's talk about habitability laws, because this is, the root issue here is there's laws in California that say you have to provide it's an implied warranty of habitability, that the property has to be at this most basic level. And I think it's worth just mentioning the code, which is really exciting. It's the California Civil Code, Section 1941. Looks like there's 9 things on there that they consider what makes a property habitable, meaning if you don't have one of the things, technically you're not legally able to live in it and or rent it out. And they're I'll just go through them and quickly. One is effective waterproofing and weather protection of the roof and exterior walls, including unbroken windows and doors. So you have to provide first security from the weather, right? Pretty simple. Plumbing or gas facilities that are in good working order. You have to have a water supply that's approved by the law, meaning you can't, hook a hose up through a window and call that water. That's capable of producing both hot and cold running water. Heat, you have to be able to heat the house. You have to have electrical lighting with, that's up to code. And then the building, grounds, and appurtenances at the time of commencement of the lease or rental agreement, all under control of the landlord, kept clean, sanitary, and free from trash, basically, including rodents and vermin. So if you have like an infestation of mice or some sort of rodent, that it makes the property uninhabitable. And then the place to dispose of trash, like you can't just tell people to throw trash out the back door. Floors, stairways, and railings maintained in good repair. And then the last one is that you have to be able to secure the property. So like the exterior facing doors need a deadbolt, things like that. So that's them in their most basic form. And I think that they take on, there's more nuance and more, things are up to debate if people want to file lawsuits over these things. But that's what the code says in a very generic form. We didn't read it word for word. But in essence, if you don't provide those things, you're not doing your job as a landlord. You're not fulfilling the most basic, things that the law requires. And this comes up sometimes especially when we're dealing with our clients who maybe aren't the best fit or maybe don't understand the habitability laws. But if they can't provide those things, then it provides legal options for your tenants, and they can either not pay rent, they can break leases, they can, there are people, uninhabitable property is one of the most common defenses against an eviction. So if you're, it's just good advice to make sure the house is habitable. And obviously that's an extreme example of what we're talking about, but go ahead, you have something to say.
Yeah, even more so, I think, obviously, there's plenty of things not mentioned that could fall under that category. Mildew, mold. And I think what I've seen in inspections is if mildew comes up or there's, something damp in the wall, I think even for landlords to understand that although those aren't specific to those 9 parts of the code, that this is someone's home that they truly value someone's home at the time. The tenants are living there and treating it as their home. I think that's a big one that comes up, just is very sensitive to tenants because their safety is valued so much. But I agree.
That's definitely a 4-letter word in property management, because mold and we could do a whole podcast on that and what's safe, what's unsafe, and but it does go back to, like, you can't just ignore things, like
right.
And just because something maybe is not like explicitly spelled out in the code doesn't mean that someone's not going to try to make the code apply in their situation. Right. But it goes back to the principle that if something's broken or something's not right, fix it. Like it's in its most basic form, it seems pretty like, of course you should fix things when they break. But there are landlords out there who don't want to fix things the right way. And if you try to, use unlicensed labor or, people that don't have contractor's license if it's required, you're just giving your tenants more ammunition against you. Because we've been through, unfortunately, we've lived through a couple lawsuits by tenants related to some of these factors, and they throw every strategy they can at the wall to see which one sticks, and which is why it's very important that that the landlord has a process and a standard that they uphold when it comes to repairing the property. What else? What else can you share just in general about this topic?
Something that I have been thinking about as we do prepare to move in a year or so, I think about the things that may not be considered broken, or they may not be considered complete, maintenance repairs. But a lot of times in the properties, I will see faucets that they will only turn off their drip if they're at the exact spot with the handle, or if you move them in the exact specific way. And again, the faucet works, it's not broken, but it is something very specific. It's annoying. The tenants get annoyed at that all the time. That's a very common thing that I see in inspections. And I've been thinking about the things in my home as we prepare to rent. What are those things that aren't necessarily broken, but that could be frustrations? Or what are the things that I know how to deal with in a specific way, but that other people might not be able to live with or deal with? And I've been trying to strategically get things repaired, in the course of a year, so that it doesn't come to when I'm trying to advertise the property and, I realize I have $2,000 worth of fixes and then $3,000 in a week after more things come up. And so I think, and given I know not all landlords have a year to prepare, I know sometimes it's a week or a month, and, you don't have the luxury of kind of spacing that out or budgeting for those things. But I think trying to prepare as best as possible in advance if you do know that you will be renting your home, so that it's not as big of a financial burden when things come up, or you're down to the last second and there's 10 different things that need to be fixed. So even if it's not a huge repair or something that's broken, just strategically thinking, what are some things that tenants might be frustrated about that might cause them not to love the property, or might cause them to leave after a year because they want to go somewhere better. That's something that
it's good advice, because you as the homeowner who pay for the house and have to bear all the costs of repairs, you might be okay with like a sticky shower handle that you have to like tap 3 times in one direction before it turns off completely, right? But your tenants, it's not their house. They're not paying the mortgage. They don't necessarily have that ownership mentality. And if that's what it's like when they move in, guess what they're going to do? They're going to put in a work order and say, this is broken, come fix it. It's going to we're going to send a handyman or a plumber out there, and then it's going to put the owner in a weird spot. Because if the owner's like, well, it works if you do this dance and that dance, and then you whatever you do to it to make it stop, that just doesn't cut it on someone that doesn't have an ownership mentality. You know, your house shouldn't have an owner's manual of all the quirks to it, right? Like it's in your best interest to do exactly what you're talking about. Like, you know, you're going to rent it out. You already, and by the way, every owner of their property knows what is weird and messed up about their house, right? Like, I could tell you 5 things about my house right now that if I was going to rent it out, I'd have to fix. But since I'm not necessarily fixing it. So it's a good point, though. It's better to fix that stuff now. And the other thing I'll say is it's cheaper to do it the way you're talking about than waiting, because when you're moving, you're already getting hit with a bunch of expenses related to moving. And then if you have to fix a punch list that's a mile long, that's expensive. And once you move out and the tenant's not moving in right behind you, you have lost rent expenses. So it's better to tackle things if you have the time. And then the second best thing there would be to tackle everything at once. Like, if you don't have the luxury that you have, it's to tackle them all at the same time, because it's cheaper to send a couple of vendors and have them do a bunch of things than it is to send them for one thing and then a month later for another and a month later for another, which is what happens when a tenant lives there. When a tenant lives there, they don't report everything at once. They'll report things as they come across them, and it usually means it costs the landlord more money because there's trip charges, and you don't get the economies of scale when they can get in there and fix 15 things on a punch list versus one. So
yeah,
but good. Well, this has been good. I'm excited for you and Mitchell that you guys are going to be renting your house out, and I know you have some big decisions to make, maybe for another podcast, on whether you're going to do the whole house hack thing and convert space to bedrooms, and those are all exciting things to look forward to. I'd say that one thing that makes the military strategy unique is you're not really ever going to go back to this house unless after you guys retire out of the military, you go, Ventura County is the place for us. Usually with this strategy, you're living in the house for a year or two, and then you're never going to see that thing again, right? Have you thought about, did that factor into like how you bought the house or where you bought the house, or like what does that look like in your head?
It did. I think I even still with the house we chose, I maybe held on to my preferences a bit too much. Peter, you told me over and over, it's just a year and a half, it's just 2 years. It's not a big deal if it's not your favorite home, which I definitely think is helpful with the military strategy of buying and then renting as you go, because, you're not looking for your dream home. You don't have to narrow it down to, 5 certain things that you're looking for, and you won't accept anything else. But I do think I was still a bit picky. But I am, I do, after, seeing tenants and working with a property management company, I do think there are still a lot of things you should look for while you're buying, obviously. But it is definitely easier knowing that it's not your forever home or even a home you'll really ever live in again, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you did find your forever home, it'd probably be really hard to move away.
Yeah.
You'd probably get depressed when you had to leave. So.
I'm sure.
Anyhow, Leah, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you sharing your perspective. Wish you all the best of luck, and hopefully our listeners got a few good tips on why having a rent-ready standard and presenting a property that's ready to move in is so important. So thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me.